The federal government's call to hand in arms has been answered by local gun owners, with a mountain of weapons at Newcastle Police Station growing day by day. Since the buyback began last Friday, between 500 and 600 weapons have been handed over.
At this stage, I feel that we've only just scratched the surface. We've got an initial rush to bring guns in to get rid of them. I think probably because people are after a little bit extra money for Christmas.
Police are surprised at the type of weapons being turned in. An M16 has been handed over along with several SKS and SKK assault rifles. Each weapon is registered and then bagged, ready to be shipped to Sydney and then destroyed. Senior Constable Len Wright says many gun owners are finding it difficult to part with their weapons.
There's quite a lot of resentment there, but I still feel that a lot of the people bringing them in realise what the government's trying to do. And I think that in the long run, the only people who can benefit by it is the public.
Police are expecting the response to slow and then pick up again when the buyback ends in September next year. Blake Doyle, NBN News. "400 of the state's top tourism decision makers are in Newcastle, taking the opportunity to sample some of the Hunter's world-famous wines which will spearhead a Hunter gastro-tourism plan. Launching the plan at the state's annual tourism conference in the city today, tourism heads say the Hunter's food and wine is reason enough to visit.
There will be a whole range of promotion of those particular regional items, and that's a very important part that we see in regionalism, is to actually pick the products that do grow very well in a specific region and promote them.
And the plan is also designed to support those on the land growing the produce.
If we don't work with our water problem that we do have in this state and don't start looking at it, if we don't start encouraging our farmers and start giving them the kudos that they so richly deserve, they will walk from the land.
Tomorrow the conference will address the 2000 Olympics and maximising the tourism spin-offs to New South Wales.
Well, I'd like to see some of the posters on the backs of buses, on billboards, in magazines.
The Salamander Bay man was travelling north along the Dungog Road just after 12 last night. Police believe the 18-year-old veered off the road into the wooden beams of the Wattle Creek Bridge. The top rail of the bridge smashed through the windscreen into the man's chest, pushing him into the back seat of the car and killing him instantly. The vehicle was discovered this morning when a passing motorist noticed the side rail of the bridge had been torn off. Police say driver fatigue may have contributed to the crash. Vanessa Spark, NBN News.
The newest club on the block met for a weight session this morning, some familiar Newcastle faces and some not so familiar. One of the latter is former Illawarra second rower Neil Piccinelli. He followed coach Graham Murray to Newcastle, and while he came for a brief visit last year, the 28-year-old arrived this morning for good.
Like this year we're training for a purpose, like we know we're actually going to go ahead. So the last year we were training, it was a bit, we're going hard, but there was always that chance it wasn't going to happen.
Former Knights Paul Marquette and Keith Beecham are two of the players to make the local switch.
It's good. I met the boys last Monday for the first time, and good bunch of blokes, and it's strong, feeling strong.
It's all looking good at the moment. The boys are keen to get going. We were keen last year, but it got knocked down, so we're keen than ever now.
Meantime, the Mariners have said they'll be keen to talk with the Johns brothers, but only when and if the chance arises. Both are still on contract to the Knights and ARL. Jonathan Upton, NBN News.
The fire broke out in a bedroom of the Mayfield guest house shortly after 4 this morning. Minutes later, the weatherboard structure was engulfed in flames, some reaching 10 metres into the air. As the fire intensified, the dazed occupants scrambled for their lives, escaping with just the clothes on their backs. Fire ripped through the ceiling of the house, flames leaping through the roof. At one stage, fears were held for the safety of a man living in the guest house. He was later found across the road. Daylight revealed the true extent of the damage, every room in the house destroyed. Fire investigators say without smoke alarms, the fire could have been fatal.
The lucky thing was that the premises were protected by early warning smoke detectors, and the occupants had vacated the premises and there was no injuries.
The occupants of the house lost everything in the blaze. They're now being relocated by the Department of Social Security. Police scientific investigations are continuing into the cause of the fire. Meanwhile, the Newcastle Fire Brigade was called to an outbreak in a Bar Beach home this afternoon. The blaze began when a plumber tried to solder a laundry pipe, accidentally igniting insulation cabling. A firefighter sprained his ankle when running to the scene, while the plumber suffered from minor burns. Blake Doyle, NBN News.
The Japanese national girls team was in Newcastle today for a training clinic and they couldn't have wished for a better instructor. Olympic gold medalist, the Northern Territory's Nova Paris, passed on her skills and knowledge to the up-and-coming stars of the game as local Olympic officials tried to woo their Japanese counterparts.
Young kids like this who come over here will go back with an experience and certainly portray that to their country so that certainly people will be looking at a further experience over here in the lead up to the games, yeah.
Hockey is one of a number of sports hoping to attract international teams to the region. Meantime, Newcastle cricket ace Anthony Stewart will be playing for an international cap when he lines up for an Australian 11 against the West Indies in Hobart this weekend. The pace bowler earned the spot after his 5-wicket haul against Victoria in the Sheffield Shield. And Curry's Daniel Stoffer is the new Australian 500cc dirt track champion after a gripping final in Kempsey on the weekend. Daniel and his younger brother Jamie produced one of the most exciting races in years, duelling for the entire event. The family scored the 1-2 double, Daniel winning his first Australian crown. Jonathan Upton, NBN News.
This year's wheat crop has had a dream run. Well-timed rain and sunny conditions combining to produce a bumper harvest across the northwest. With only 40% of the region's crop in the bag, farmers hope the fine conditions continue during the next few weeks. The biggest problem they face now is getting the grain to the silos.
Even the growers are having trouble finding trucks to cart the grain from their farm to the silos. We're having the same thing, trying to get trucks into our bunker storages.
While the golden harvest flows in steadily, the financial rewards may not be as fruitful. Wheat prices dropping below last year's figure to $148 a tonne.
Once again, the Australian farmers have learned a lesson. We have to be slicker marketers in terms of using various forward selling and pricing options that are open to us.
Harvesting is expected to start in other parts of the state before the end of the month. Vanessa Spark, NBN News.
The emotion was overwhelming at the pit. Local soccer identity Ken Kaiser reaching for comfort after hearing his 30-year-old son Mark had been killed.
The Kaisers, the word is synonymous with soccer without Northern New South Wales and within Australia, so obviously when it is now known that there's one of the people that lost their life, I think it will have an effect on everyone.
Relatives of the dead and the 160 miners at Gretley will receive professional counselling tomorrow.
And people have emotional reactions to these events that they haven't had before.
The people of Wallsend are devastated by the tragedy, but they won't mourn alone.
It's a very sad occasion, very sad event, tragic event for their families and for their relatives and the community, those who know them.
The death sparked an immediate response from the state government. It's launched the most comprehensive mine investigation in nearly 20 years.
I've instructed the Chief Inspector of Mines to undertake a very thorough inquiry into this instance, and it will be done in a way that has never been done before for a coal mine accident.
In a cruel irony, the disaster comes just a week after Cabinet approved a major review of mine safety. That'll now be fast-tracked and is expected to be completed early in the new year. Richard O'Leary, NBN News.
Relatives and friends arrived at the mine hoping a rescue was still possible, but it was clear nothing could be done to save the 4 men.
I would describe it as one of the most unpleasant days of my life, and I think of a lot of other people's lives. It is something that is difficult to come to grips with.
4 mates lost, the Newcastle colliery shut down for the day. The men had been drilling a new coal face 120 metres down. They struck a shaft sealed since the early 1900s. It was holding tons of water. Miraculously, 4 other workers were swept out of the shaft to safety. Nearly 8 hours after the accident, the bodies were recovered.
It was like a rabbit's burrow down there. We were going around at 90-degree angles, 180-degree angles. It took some time to get down there.
Late this afternoon, the 4 dead were named. They were Edward Batterham, aged 48, John Hunter, 36, Mark Kaiser, 30 and Damon Murray, 19. Vanessa Spark, NBN News.
Dr. Don Morris is something of a pioneer. Back in the early 60s, when Australian tertiary institutions were imposing stone edifices, he helped create a university in tune with its natural surroundings. It wasn't always an easy task.
In fact, for many years I resisted a lot of pressure to install watering systems and produce very green lawns.
The end result of his labours was a unique learning environment which set the standard for many new universities across the country. Newcastle Uni has now recognised his contribution with the dedication of a special nature walk through a beautiful but artificial wetland. Dr. Morris hopes his legacy to the students of the future is not simply an appreciation of the environment, but an environment which nurtures students. Phil Hind, NBN News.
Rundle's factory floor was empty this morning after a decision by workers to travel to Sydney and protest outside Westpac's head office. But while on the road, the Textile Clothing and Footwear Union stepped in and stopped the planned protest, claiming it could jeopardise fickle relations between Rundle's and Westpac. The union is confident that with nearly 300 jobs on the line at Rundle's, the state government will persuade Westpac to take a more compassionate view.
Certainly would. If it's helping Westpac help our situation, yes, I certainly would welcome it.
Things were a little busier on the shop floor today as Rundle's threw its doors open for a sale designed to satisfy creditors. A steady crowd was keen to snap up a bargain in the sale which ends on Sunday. Despite the current setbacks, the Rundle family is determined to tough it out.
They're keen to support the company. They're offering to work much harder and try all sorts of things to assist the company. Our suppliers have been backing us, our customers have been backing us, and I think there's a world and way for us to go ahead from here.
The only movements at the Gretley mine today were coal trucks keeping the export market supplied. The mine itself is closed indefinitely as investigators begin the painstaking job of piecing together the tragedy. Early indications are underground maps being used by the crew didn't accurately show the position of the abandoned and flooded shaft which took their lives.
We did not know or suspect or have reason to suspect on the data that we had available to us that we were anywhere near 50 metres to an old working.
Under government regulations, any mining crew working within 50 metres of a former shaft need to be accompanied by a surveyor. Academics warn a labyrinth of mine shafts run beneath Newcastle, many of them mapped before the turn of the century.
Most mines probably should have a geologist on site, particularly underground, and particularly if there are any known obstacles or geological structures that may cause a mining problem.
Meanwhile, a team of trauma counsellors have been working closely with some of the 182 staff employed at Gretley, among them the 4 men who'd just taken a break near the disaster site.
They're coping very well under the circumstances. You know, they came very close to the action, and they're having the sorts of symptoms that we would expect at this time, and the good thing is that they're talking about it.
The community has rallied around the mine workers. All eyes, especially those of the union, will now be focused on the findings of a state government inquiry into the disaster.
And it's up to us as legislators to ensure that the mechanisms are there to enforce the safety rules that are brought down.
A memorial service for the disaster victims is being planned for early next week. Phil Hind, NBN News.
When water burst into a mine shaft last week, it killed 4 miners where they worked and silenced the pit for a week. Today, hundreds involved in the industry gathered for a moving series of services. The first for 48-year-old Eddie Batterham, a mine deputy, devoted husband and dad, left behind a wife and teenage son.
We're grateful for his loyalty, devotion and integrity, for his example and for his intellect.
Another packed church of friends and relatives farewelled 36-year-old John, or Harry Hunter as he was known to his mates. The Lake Macquarie miner loved his sport, golf, fishing and baseball. His death heartbreaking for parents, brother and girlfriend. Young members of the sporting fraternity formed a guard of honour for their coach, umpire and friend. Just as heartrending, the service for 30-year-old Mark Kaiser. In a huddle of family and friends, his wife Lisa, their 18-month-old son Jed and Mark's father Ken, shattered by the loss.
Mark was loved and influenced by his mates. The memories of you all, the soccer, the parties, the stories, but most of all, the love you gave our son will be forever cherished.
19-year-old Damon Murray was the youngest to die at Gretley. His family's long associations with mining still did not prepare them for such a loss. After a service at his beloved surf club, the young miner was buried at a seaside ceremony.
The Public Health Unit report is food for thought for Novocastrians. During the year, the public inspectors made surprise visits to 500 of the 4,000 food outlets across Newcastle, and the results are appalling for consumers.
Consumers need to be very careful of the places where they go and buy their food from or where they eat, because most of them appear to be unsatisfactory.
The report found only 5% of food outlets passed the test, the remainder failing on hygienic grounds. One hotel kitchen failed dismally.
A vermin infestation involving cockroaches, which they were crawling over foodstuffs, over food about to be served in a particular hotel.
But the food service report has angered the Restaurant and Caterers Association, which claims it's potentially damaging to the restaurant industry.
From my experience and my knowledge of the restaurateurs and the coffee lounge operators in this area, that is not so. I would put it down to a very small figure, and so I question the basis of this report.
Newcastle City Council inspectors will follow up on the report. Blake Doyle, NBN News.
Helen Boney died in the couple's Tamworth house after a day of drinking and smoking drugs with friends in February last year. Her de facto husband, Warren Ty, told police she had fallen from her bed and hit her head on their baby's cot. The prosecution claimed instead she'd been assaulted around the face and head and died of a brain hemorrhage. Warren Ty was charged with murder. With conflicting medical evidence on how Helen Boney's injuries came about, Justice Hunt suggested the jury consider a charge of manslaughter, to which they found Warren Ty guilty. He was remanded in custody for sentencing early next year.
Cessnock's Mount View High School has the unique distinction of being the state's only school with a liquor licence. Since 1992, Year 11 students have been turning out a selection of whites and reds from their modest vineyard. The 1996 offering, safely under lock and key in a storeroom, a Shiraz Merlot and a Semillon.
It's a boutique winery, which is a very popular sector in the Australian market now, and it's well worth buying because it tastes good, supposedly, and it's good because it's different.
The students don't actually make the wine, that's done by the local Drayton's winery. However, they do everything else right down to the labels.
The major value is that it allows them to hook into some of the things that have been identified by employers as being valuable for future employees to have.
Tonight, the students will host a fully catered launch for 60 guests. It's been a crash course in marketing and sales.
We come up with the idea for the dinner about 3 months ago, and at first we had a lot of problems with the licence, but then we've got it all together and tonight's the night.
At $10 a bottle, the school hopes to cover costs and maybe even make a small profit. Phil Hind, NBN News. What the rally lacked in size had made up for in feeling. Young and old gathered to hear speakers collectively denounce the views of Pauline Hanson and seek a speedy end to Australia's damaging immigration debate. But most disturbing were claims that Newcastle's migrant community was and still is the subject of racist attacks.
Well, as the son of a migrant, yeah, racism's here. Racism's alive and well in Newcastle. I think racism's alive and well in all of Australia.
And some of those in Pauline Hanson's sights hope the debate never goes away.
What it ultimately will do is will encourage people to at least think about the issue as an individual.
Meanwhile, a new political party was launched in Labor's heartland today. The party is so new it's yet to be named. Many of its members are former ALP left voters, disenchanted with Labor's shift to the right.
We don't like the ideas of deregulation of the financial system. We'd like government intervention where necessary, union and award supporting, all those sorts of things that are really important to workers and their families in Australia.
A party manifesto will be announced tomorrow. Blake Doyle, NBN News.
When the three councils signed the agreement to form the Hunter Resource Recovery Company in August, it was hailed as a more environmentally sensitive era in the Hunter. Now, even before the scheme is up and running, one Lake Macquarie councillor is urging his colleagues to back out.
At the time we were presented with a proposal, we thought we want to do the right thing with recycling. This looks like a proposal, but since that time we've seen better ones. You can see you can get a better service at a better price.
Councillor Brewster points to Newcastle Council, which opted out of the deal to go it alone, charging ratepayers $20 a year, while Lake Macquarie ratepayers will be charged $42. However, those behind the cooperative arrangement say Councillor Brewster isn't comparing apples with apples.
For their $20, the residents of Newcastle are going to be receiving a very reduced recycling service.
Newcastle residents will use crates instead of wheelie bins, and if they want to recycle glass, plastics and aluminium, they'll have to take them to a drop-in centre. Both the Maitland and Cessnock councils remain firmly committed to the recycling joint venture. However, Maitland Mayor John Martin says in the unlikely event Lake Macquarie did pull out, the tender would have to be re-evaluated. The cooperative recycling scheme is scheduled to be up and running by May.
The PGA National Futures Championship showcases the cream of Australia's emerging golfing talent. This afternoon's Pro-Am gave some a look at the course for the first time. Someone who needed no introduction to the layout was Newcastle's Tony Wells. He'll fly the local flag against a host of other competitors, both from Australia and overseas. Australian pros were first onto the course. 1994 Futures winner Ewan Walters is again expected to be up on the leaders board. The 26-year-old Australian Institute of Sport member started the round in fine style, 1 under par at the 14th. The international guests will have their first practice round tomorrow. Among the starters, players from the United States, Britain, Canada, Japan and New Zealand, all vying for $36,000 prize money, an invitation to the US PGA Assistance Championships and a player's card on the Australian Tour. Offering little more than bad habits, some of Newcastle's other sporting elite also competed in today's Pro-Am. Wildfire's captain Stuart Jones lethal with a putter. So too Hunter Eagles coach Shane Barclay. Jonathan Upton, NBN News. The Monday Morning Post-Mortem is coming in all too familiar situation. The Breakers were the better side on the weekend against Collingwood, but failed to get a result.
That shows maybe a lack of character, and I think that's what we've got to be concerned with, or I'm concerned with, that the blokes are too comfortable getting a pat on the back for playing quite well but not winning the game.
The Breakers had their chances on Friday night, in fact plenty of them, but failed to find the net more than once. The side was on fire early on, but the flames died as the night progressed. Cosmina rejects suggestions the team is unfit.
You know, I can't see us being too much fitter than we are. If the players want extra fitness, that's because they are part-time, they're going to have to do that themselves.
Last week he said he didn't know what to do to improve the side's finishing, and the feelings haven't changed. Cosmina will work on the problem this week as the Breakers prepare for their next match against the Melbourne Knights.
We do a lot of work at training on shooting, but taking it from the training field to the game situation is a different thing altogether, because there are a whole lot of other influences involved.
The Knights Breakers clash has been brought forward from Sunday to Friday night. The side departs for Melbourne Friday morning. Jonathan Upton, NBN News.